Good. Well, welcome to the Annual Language Lecture 2020. And this particular lecture is going to be the launch of Self-Discovery. Self-Discovery is a text attributed to Shankara. That's Adi Shankara, the first Shankara. However, we suspect that this was actually authored by a later Shankaracharya. So it's one of the texts which is in the Shankaracharya tradition. Now, my wife and I, habitually, we go to places and on holiday, and we translate this text. So this is our way of amusing ourselves on holiday. I know it sounds a bit strange, but that's what we do. And we spend an hour a day translating. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And I hope you can see that. This is the front cover of Self-Discovery. Swatma Nirupanam is the Sanskrit title. Nirupanam means the discovery, even possibly definition of Swatma, of one's own self. This is the pointing out, the finding out about one's own self. And this diagram, which you can see on the screen, is actually very illustrative of this. Very generously, Brian Wright created this image. The outer circle represents the food sheath, or veil, as we've called it in this translation. Observe now that you have a body. This is made up of food. This is the food sheath. And this text says, you are not that body. You are not the physical world. You are not invested, if you like, in the physical world, and yourself is beyond that physical world. The next circle in represents the life force, prana, as it's called in Sanskrit. Because behind the physical, we have the life force which informs the physical. Even behind that, we have the mind. This is the mental world, and all sorts of thoughts, of course, go on in the mind all the time. And you are not that, because it is changing. The physical world is changing. The world of the prana, the life force, is changing. And the world of the mind is also always changing. Even behind that, we have, if you're very quiet, you will notice there is an intelligence even behind the mind. This is called buddhi in Sanskrit. You are not that buddhi. You are not that intelligence. And even behind that, we have what's called the bliss veil or sheath. This is Ananda. And this, the text says, is the ego, the very center of your identity as an individual. And self-discovery says, in reality, you are not that. We have in the school a very simple formula for remembering this. It is Om Paramatmane Namah. To the Supreme Self, a bow. Parama is supreme, Atmane, to the self, Namah, a bow. So let's start by remembering this. And if we fall quiet and just close our eyes, and just listen. Remember, I am not this body. This body is subject to change. It comes and it goes. I am not this life force. behind the physical, informing and supporting the physical. So be aware of that life force and know, I am not that life force. It's continuously changing. And now be aware of the thoughts in the mind coming and going. I am not those thoughts. Obviously, I cannot be, because they too are changing all the time. I am not the intelligence or intellect, that quiet part of the mind. And I am not even that ego, that identity with which I normally identify. This is the bliss sheath or bliss veil. I am that Paramatman, that supreme self pervading everywhere. Om Paramatmane Namah. Atah. So, I did say in the material sent out about this webinar that there are a few things in this text which are really new to us. And one of these topics in particular is the question, why do I need a teacher? Verse 42 says, I do not perform actions which are driven by desire or prohibited. My inner being has been purified by spiritual practices, and I know myself. So why do I need a teacher? Such an attitude, the text says, should not be entertained. It's very easy, particularly as we get on in years, to think, well, I don't need a teacher. I can study the texts. I can get on all right by myself. But Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy of non-duality, does not advise this. One does need a teacher to actualize the realization. So what does this teacher do? What is the function of this teacher? Why have the teacher? There are three facets to the teacher which the text outlines. First of all, the teacher subdues the demon of false perception. That's strong language, but it is like a demon in a way. This causes one to see duality. I can think now, I'm here, Warwick Jessup, and there's an audience of hundreds of people out there. That is false perception. It's the perception of duality. Or I can even think, I'm Warwick Jessup, I'm standing here, and there's a computer in front of me. Also, that is false perception. The real perception is when one realizes there is only consciousness. The teacher also is compassionate. This is an important quality. My everyday job is being a teacher, and this works at all levels. If you cannot really empathize with the students you have in front of you, you don't really know what they need. So this emphasis upon the compassion of the teacher is important in the text. The teacher, because the teacher does not have impediments, does not have difficulties himself or herself, can see through the eyes of the pupil or disciple or student. The teacher is right there with the student, so this is important. And thirdly, it is said that the teacher points out the non-dual experience of that. Now, what does this mean? Well, it refers particularly to this statement, you are that. You, the individual, are that universal. Now, what's in red here, according to the text, needs to be discarded because these are our everyday views of individual and universal. They need to give way to what's in green, and so the witness and unchanging are retained, not discarded. So I could think here, I'm Warwick Jessup, I've got a body, I've got senses, I'm doing something, I'm giving a webinar. But I can step behind that. I can be aware of the witness of this situation. I don't have to continually identify with being Warwick Jessup. The simple witness is found in stillness. Or I could think, I'm here, Warwick Jessup, I'm surrounded by these great forces, the elements. There is a creator who has created this great creation all around me, an omniscient creator. And this, according to the text, would also be a mistake, because behind that omniscient creator is the unchanging, which is the same as the witness. So you, the witness, are that unchanging. There is only the unchanging witness. This is the teaching of you are that, according to self-discovery. But of course, it's not always that simple, is it? Let's face it. Yes, it would be nice to think that one could always remember that, but let's face it, in the world, there are difficulties, kleshas, as they're called. And these are enumerated. In fact, the text says that unless one is able to transcend these 5 sheaths, remove these 5 veils, if you like, one will experience difficulties. And these difficulties are ignorance, avidya, ego, asmita, attachment, raga, aversion, dvesha, and obsession, abhinivesha. And I don't know about you, but I find that you see these quite a bit. Even preparing for this webinar is an example of this. I don't count myself terribly good at technical things. And as the number of people attending this webinar increased and increased, I got a little nervous. Why did I get nervous? Because I thought I was Warwick Jessup having to give a webinar. That's the ignorance, that's the avidya. And here the ego steps in. One identifies with being an individual. And of course, if Warwick Jessup is giving a webinar, then of course there are attachments and aversions. One wants things to go well, and one doesn't like it if things are going not so well, if the technology fails or something. And all this is based upon an egotistic idea. And all that is based upon the basic ignorance of forgetting this svatma, one's own self, which is pervading everywhere. And finally, of course, one gets obsessed. One gets so much into it that one gets totally absorbed into whatever one is doing, and the attachment gets very obsessive. The blessing of this presentation is that we have had this teaching all the time, and I must say it is very good to have this teaching on the veils, because one can step back from those attachments through remembering the discipline of removing those veils, of saying, I'm not this, I'm not this. So here are the 5 veils. And one gets to the center, by saying, I'm not the food sheath or veil, I'm not the breath sheath, I'm not the mind, I'm not the intellect, I'm not even that ego. But the question is this enough? And my wife suggested a story here, which I think is relevant. There was a great warrior called Abhimanyu. He was only 16 years old during the time of the great battle of Kurukshetra, which is in the epic, the Mahabharata. He was on the Pandava side. His father was Arjuna. And the Kauravas, the enemy, were using a formation of concentric circles, just like in the diagram. These were troops surrounding a center, and the generals were in the center. It was a very difficult formation to beat because it would swirl around and it would gobble up all the people in its way. So it was very important that this formation was overcome. Abhimanyu was the only person around at the time who knew how to defeat this formation. He had learnt how to do this from his father, Arjuna. Whilst Abhimanyu was in the womb, he had heard his father explain this to his mother, Subhadra. Subhadra, however, Arjuna's wife, was not that interested, as it happens, in battle formations, and she fell asleep, unfortunately, halfway through this explanation. So Arjuna explained to Subhadra how to get into this will formation, but not how to get out. And so Abhimanyu in the womb heard and learnt how to get into the formation, how to break into it, but not how to get out. And when the time came, and it was imperative that he broke into the formation in order for the Kaurava army to be defeated, he rather bravely said to all the other Pandava brothers, and Arjuna, his father, unfortunately, was in another part of the battlefield at the time, he said to the other Pandava brothers, I can do it, I'll get in. Don't worry, I'm only 16 years old, but I can do it. I know how to get in. But do you know how to get out? Said the other brothers. Well, don't worry, you follow me up. And so it was decided that Abhimanyu would break into this formation and the other Pandava brothers would follow him. Unfortunately, as Abhimanyu entered the formation, the other Pandava brothers could not enter because the gate through which Abhimanyu had gone was sealed. So he was left alone. He made it almost to the center, but unfortunately was killed, surrounded by so many troops, because he didn't know how to get out. And perhaps there is a message here for all of us, because we can transcend these veils, but we also need to realize how to get out, as it were. That means how to realize that these veils are only consciousness. Because let's face it, we're faced with these veils all the time. We need to realize that Atman, that supreme consciousness in these veils. So I'm looking at a screen now. I am only seeing consciousness. I'm experiencing consciousness in my thoughts, everywhere. This is called anvaya. It means realizing that the absolute is everywhere, in everything. The first process we were introduced to this morning is called vyatireka, not this, not this. But this text says we need both. We need the vyatireka, not this, not this. And then, having reached the center, we need to realize that the consciousness is everywhere. Finally, this text finishes with the very simple statement that only non-duality is real. Duality superimposed on non-duality is unreal, just as there is no silver in mother of pearl, nor water glistening in a mirage. We are, according to this text, imagining the duality. It is unreal. It's not really there. If we walk along the beach and we see a shell with silvery substance inside, it's not really silver. If we're in a desert, or perhaps more realistically, if we're in a hot country and we see what seems to be water on the road ahead, it's an optical illusion. The water isn't really there. In just the same way, this text is saying that the duality isn't really there. We don't need to buy into it. Only non-duality is real. So I think I'm now going to pass over to my wife, who's going to demonstrate a recitation of one of these verses, which particularly emphasizes the Anvaya, I am all this.
Well, great. Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak about recitation and why it's important. Also, I'm going to demonstrate recitation of verse 14 of this text. So why even listen to this? Recitation is important because it opens the heart. It's the difference between hearing something in theory and really hearing it. I'm going to share my screen, although some other screens, but thank you very much. Great. So I'm going to speak about the meter of this text, self-discovery. And so what, first of all, is meter? It's basically the framework or the cadence that gives shape to the speech. And it gives the rhythmic structure given to the words. So the meter of self-discovery is called giti, and it's based on certain patterns. A short vowel syllable has a value of 1, and a long vowel syllable, a diphthong syllable, or a short vowel syllable before a conjoined consonant has a value of 2. And I'm going to explain what all of these are, so don't worry. So this has a weight of 1. These are the syllables that have a weight of 1. A short vowel, na, ti, ku, for example. It's a simple vowel produced at a short length. This has a weight of 2. There are 3 instances, as I mentioned before. First of all, with a long vowel, na, ti, ku. A diphthong is the second type of weight of 2 that we can get. So diphthong is a combination of 2 vowels. Re, that's a combination of a and e, the a part. Sai, another combination of a and e, the I part. Bo, combination of a and u. A short vowel that comes before a double consonant also has a weight of 2. Bimb. So here's our double consonant, and it's the short vowel before it. Bimb. These are actual examples from the text I'm about to recite. Sat, nand. Now, to get this giti verse form, there are 2 parts to the verse, to each line, excuse me. So in the first part, you have a value of 12 for all the syllables. So you add up those values that we just looked at. So here, if we add up this first part, we get to a value of 12, 2 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2. That gives us 12. Then you get a pause, known as a caesura. And the second part has a value of 18. So again, if we add these up, you get 18. The same happens in the second line. This isn't the number of syllables in a line or in a pada, in a foot, which is what we would usually get in Sanskrit. It's the value of each syllable. So it's slightly different. If any of you out there know anything about Sanskrit meter, it's a bit different to something like a shloka or an upajati. If you don't know anything about meter, don't worry about it. So 12, caesura, 18. 12, caesura, 18. I'm now going to recite this for you. I'm going to recite it twice, and then I'm going to invite you to recite it with me, but I'll go really slowly, and you can do it at home. So here we go. Yas purati bimba bhutas sabhavedananda eva sakalatma pragurtvam api cha sattvad avikaritvad apajyamanatvat. I'll go again. Yas purati bimba bhutas sabhavedananda eva sakalatma pragurdhvam api cha sattvad avikaritvad apajyamanatvat. So we have a special slide. If you can't read the script, you can sing along with me, and I'll go along with my arrow. Yas purati bimba bhutas sabhavedananda eva sakalatma pragurdhvam api cha sattvad avikaritvad apajyamanatvat. And I'll read the English. The self of all shines forth as a reflection and is unmitigated bliss, for it exists before and after all, is unchanging, and cannot be removed. So we'll stop there and we'll have questions now.
Okay, right. So, Elena, you're going to fire a few questions at me?
I am. Isn't that exciting? Okay, this is from Viraj Bhakhati. Not sure from which country. I think, what is buddhi? Is it intelligence in English?
Yes, buddhi means really being awake, from bud. So it's that part of the mind which is awake, and so it can make decisions. So it's often known as the organ which discriminates real from unreal. It's the quietest part of the mind. But here, in this context, it is the intelligence sheath. And it's very easy to think one is the buddhi. Actually, a lot of us go around thinking we are the buddhi. It is the very seat of our identity. Of course, behind that, we have the ego, but it's the part of the mind which thinks, well, I can think for myself, I can discriminate, and of course, it's very useful. One needs the buddhi, one needs a clarified buddhi. And in fact, a lot of the teaching, the practice of the teaching is about clarifying this buddhi, because the buddhi has been subject to a number of changes because of situations and attachments. But if one can clarify this buddhi, then the way to liberation is clearer. So that's what it is. But ultimately, one does need to transcend this buddhi.
Great, thank you. Okay, second question. This is from Ravi Chandra Debi in Trinidad. So, how does one select the teacher, Or is that the teacher finds the student? Can you say something about the teacher and the student coming together?
Yes, very nice question, Ravi. Thank you for that. It does seem to be something which just happens by itself on occasions. And my suspicion is that if someone is searching for the truth, they will come across a teacher. This is a matter of intention. If one puts oneself into the right company, if one has a genuine desire for truth, the teacher will arise. That's from the perspective of the student. And similarly, students come to the teacher, and there's a passage in the Upanishads about this. May students come, it says in one of the Upanishads. So this is a process which naturally goes on in creation. And let's face it, in all walks of life, we have teachers and students. No matter what you're learning, no matter what profession you're in, this naturally happens. And people of like mind come together. So it's a matter really of putting oneself in the right situation, and you will find the teacher that you need, and the teacher will be united with the student. Thank you.
Okay, I've got two questions here that are quite related to each other. One is from Mahendra Pankania in London. One is from Catherine Abela, I'm not sure where from. Mahendra asks, the Ananda Mayakosha, or the bliss sheath, is related to the ego. Can this be elaborated further? How is bliss related to ego? And Catherine also asks, with regard to the five veils, why is bliss equated to ego? So it's obviously a common question. And we were discussing it this morning, weren't we?
Absolutely. This is a difficult one because at first, of course, one thinks, well, bliss, that's a very good thing. But the text says that the ego experiences the bliss in very small portions. I'll read you exactly what it says. The veil of bliss, the ego, imagines I am happy while gleaning fragments of bliss in deep sleep. How could this be the self? I don't know if you've ever had the experience when things are going really badly in life. The only sort of respite one gets from that is deep sleep. And if the ego gets into a bit of a difficult situation, one can resort to this deep sleep, and it seems the only access one has to bliss. But this is a temporary thing. It's not real, according to the teaching of Advaita. It's part of the imagination. And of course, we want to be happy. The individual wants to be happy. But this is a type of bliss which is not a real bliss. The real bliss is at the very center of one's being. It is the Swatma, one's own self. It is Sat Chit Ananda, is the unchanging witness. So bliss can be experienced in the creation, but one can still be subject to this ego. So one needs to go beyond this level. I hope that helps.
We were discussing also wanting to have fun.
Absolutely, yes. Of course, the individual wants to have fun, but the real bliss is behind that. The real substantial, unchanging bliss is behind that. So if you like, there are two types of bliss being spoken of in the scriptures here. And at this level, at the Anandamaya Kosha, it is tantamount to the ego.
Great, okay. This is from Alan Mulby from Hove, Sussex. Which sheath do emotions belong to? Does the text provide any insights into not identifying with emotions without becoming heartless?
Yes. Well, we spoke about the buddhi, and the buddhi and the citta are very closely related. So emotions would take place at that sort of level, and of course would reflect in the manas, in the mind, and would be based upon the ego. So the whole realm of emotion, if it's individual, will be in that area, in the subtle realm. And of course, it'll have effect upon the prana, the life breath, and indeed the physical. So this question of emotion is a very important one. But in the end, one needs to go beyond that whole realm. And the real essence of one's being is beyond all these feelings. One needs to have recourse to that pervasive being, swatma. And here, the etymology of the word atman is very helpful because it's derived from the root at, which means to go continuously. It's that which doesn't stop anywhere. And if one gets caught in emotions, one tends to stop in some picture of oneself or some situation. But the Atman is that which doesn't stop anywhere. It goes everywhere. It pervades everywhere. And that's the true Satchidananda, which is being spoken of here. Now, of course, in everyday life, emotions are very important in dealing with affairs. It's not being said that they can't be used. This is the anvaya. Emotion is very important. It's one of the most important aspects of life. But in first case, one needs to know I am not those emotions. And then one can use the emotions freely and fully as consciousness. This is Vyatireka again and anvaya.
Okay, this is from Melanie Wilkins in the UK. What sort of teacher do we need? Do they have to be alive? Or is it only studying their words? How important is it to meet or be in contact with a teacher in person? Is it proper to have more than one teacher?
Yes. The teacher actually is in front of one all the time. And this is the most universal idea of teacher. And it would be perhaps wrong to say that one should restrict oneself. But on the other hand, generally speaking, one cannot serve two masters. So one has to be a bit careful about this. It is best to stay with a teacher and yet also realize that life is teaching you lessons in all sorts of different ways. So everything you're faced with is in a way your teacher. Were there other aspects of that question I should pick up, Elena?
Is it proper to have more than one teacher?
Yes, I think generally speaking, it's best to be focused on one teacher. And any other aspects?
No, I think it's okay.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Okay, I've got 3 questions about recitation. I'll do them one at a time. What happens if the Sanskrit pronunciation goes wrong due to pure language ignorance? And this is from Pilar Lopez.
One does one's best with the recitation of Sanskrit. For last week, for example, I was attempting to perfect the pronunciation of some verses from the Veda. Many of you may know these verses, Yajagrato. And it was tricky. I spent a lot of time trying to really perfect it. And I'm not sure I actually really got a complete perfect recitation of it in the end. But it's the intention which is important. And pronunciation is important, but one mustn't beat oneself up about it. One just needs to put one's best foot forward and keep refining the sounding. This is a really important thing because it does go to the heart if it's pronounced properly. If the text is pronounced properly, one gets, as it were, the punya, which means the meritorious result from the recitation. And I know this from teaching children. If you start a lesson with recitation of Sanskrit, it's amazing how it changes the atmosphere in the room, and it works every time. So yes, purity of sound, attention to sounding is most important, but don't be too hard on yourself also.
I'd say it's really the journey of refining your sound than the actual destination of it being perfect in a way.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Your question actually, that question also, your answer answered the question, could you please say more about the importance of recitation, from Jethrin Hall in London. Do you want to say any more about that? I mean, you just basically answered it, but.
Well, it's the way of studying any Sanskrit text, and indeed any English text, any text in any language, is to speak it aloud. One's got to get it out aloud, and then it really takes off. And I think the way Elena introduced that verse, Yasfurati bimba bhutas sabhavedananda eva sakalatma. I find we were just walking down in Cornwall last week, and because Elena was practicing this, it was going on in my mind. And it's amazing how once something is sounded like that, it goes to your heart, it starts singing in your mind, and you start seeing the world differently. Yasfurati bimba bhutas, and one starts seeing the reflection of the absolute everywhere. Sabhaveda ananda eva sakalatma, and that's only bliss, the self of all. And one starts seeing the world in a different way, just through one of these simple sentences, having got through the defenses, as it were, having got established in the mind. And that happens through attention to the sounding.
Okay. This is from Gillian Wilkinson from South Africa. The diagram on the cover has the line of consciousness going out in a straight line. In fact, does the consciousness permeate the circles of the entire diagram?
Yes, it does. Perhaps I won't try screen sharing again, but that line is important because, of course, it cuts through all the circles, but it should radiate in all directions, really. And it's going upwards, which I think is the marvelous message which it gives, that this is the ascension, if you like, of humans to the divine, and that one realizes that this self is everywhere. So yes, you could regard it as going out in all directions.
Great. From Maria Zamit in Malta, is the compassion of the teacher perceived by students even at a distance? How? Do you have experience of this?
Yes, I do actually, and I hope I'm not going to embarrass him, but it just comes to mind to speak of Mr. Brian Wright, who did actually provide this diagram. And he has been my meditation tutor for maybe the last 10 years or so. And I don't know how it is we came together, but he offers meditation tutorials. And he is a very compassionate man. The fact that he actually produced this diagram also completely unasked. I just happened to send him a copy of the text and asked if he had any images related to it. And then he actually spent a lot of time actually creating this image. But when you have a teacher who is compassionate like that, channels open. And in the School of Philosophy and Economic Science, I have experienced this a lot, that there is a great deal of compassion and a great deal of open-heartedness, which makes the teaching be transmitted so effectively. And I've learned so much about meditation from Mr. Wright, and it's because of his compassion. I think he really sees things through my eyes. He's really with me. So yes, I do have experience of that.
Okay, this is from Norman Daw in the UK. Can you say how much of the original teaching can come through in translation? This is really about the process of translation to some degree, isn't it?
Really, isn't it? Well, it's wonderful, isn't it, to read translations? But as I've said before, translations are a bit of a fraud when you really have access to the text. It's a way in, and it is a very good way in, but it is only a way in. And as I hope will have been demonstrated with this verse we've just looked at, we've just taken one verse. There's so much more in the actual Sanskrit text. Yasfurati bimba bhutas, that which sfurati, that which shines, bimba bhuta, having become a mirror. And with those words, if one really enters into them, one can see this mirror everywhere. Sabhavedananda eva sakalatma. That would be the self of all. Ananda eva, and the bliss alone. That's the pure bliss, the bliss of Satchidananda. It's just that the Sanskrit words carry so much more meaning. And if one can understand some of the etymology of it, understand the roots of the words and the endings, one begins to enter into those words so much more fully. And there's something about the Sanskrit language which gives access to knowledge like nothing else. So yes, the translations are very useful, but if you really want to get to the essence, do take some time with the Sanskrit. And in this text, we have given access to the Sanskrit, I hope, and please do use it because it's magnificent. The words are magnificent, the sound is magnificent. So please just choose a verse, really live with it. Choose this one that we've demonstrated and really open one's heart to it.
Also, I would say we translate from the original Sanskrit. We don't look at English translations when we translate. So hopefully we're bringing over something of the original to some extent. I mean, it's nothing like the original, but.
Yeah. That's an important discipline, not initially to consult anyone else, but just to look at the Sanskrit and see what comes to mind yourself. Sometimes that can be a challenging discipline, but to work straight from the Sanskrit, yes.
Okay, I have had a few questions about this topic. This is from Patrick Conlon. How do I know I'm experiencing the false bliss of the ego rather than the bliss of the Atman?
In my experience, it will show itself, because if you find that you have all sorts of agitations, all sorts of difficulties, then that is the bliss of the ego. And we saw those 5 difficulties, didn't we? Avidya, asmita, that's ignorance, I-ness, literally, ego, raga, dvesha. And I suppose really that's the test. If you start to see the raga, the attachment, and the dvesha, the hatred, and the abhinivesha, the obsession, these are the telltale signs that the ego is operating there. So one needs to be observant here and go beyond that realm of the ego and the individual happiness.
And this is actually related. This is from Valerie Collins. What is the Sanskrit word for the impediment in the text? Because it's related, isn't it?
Yeah, klesha. Klesha is the word. This is used in the Yoga Sutras, this word klesha. And the way to overcome the kleshas, it says, is to remove the 5 veils.
Okay. This is from Zara Wilkins in the UK. Could you say something on self-love? Is feeling the emotion of love for the self something that is a distraction from truth, or can it bring us towards truth or awakening?
No, this is very good. This is the way of bhakti. This is the way of devotion. There are 3 ways, principal ways to the self: jnana, knowledge; bhakti, devotion; and karma, action. And this is very much to be encouraged. One sees the self through love everywhere. And yes, no, this is absolutely right. And this is a path which should be pursued. But in fact, you will find that all 3 are operating. It may be that one particular individual has a propensity to one of these 3 initially, but in the end, you'll find that all 3 come together. This whole work of discovery of oneself has to proceed with some knowledge, has to proceed with some work, karma, and has to proceed with some devotion. Thank you.
I have 2 questions from the opposite sides of the world that are phrased in exactly the same way. So the one, well, it's from Bernie Krochek in Australia, but also Jayaram Ramanath in London. How does God figure in all of this?
Ooh. It depends what you mean by God. If God is the absolute, the Swatma, the self, then that is what Swatma Nirupanam is speaking about. But of course, there is sometimes the word God is used in the sense of the creator, and that's the Ishvara. And this text is saying that one needs to go beyond that. So one needs to go beyond the idea of the individual, which goes together with this Ishvara, or omniscient creator. So the individual soul is called the Jiva, and the omniscient creator is called Ishvara. And remember in the diagram, we had that in red. That needs to be discarded, all ideas of an omniscient creator, so that one gets to the unchanging witness. And that unchanging witness could also be called God, in which case that's exactly what the text is recommending.
I've got a great question here from Nepal, who even put an Anjali after his name. Viraj Bhakati. How should one try to achieve Satchidananda? Is it through immersion into the scriptures, or meditation, or yoga, or simply following the guru or the teacher? What is the general process like?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what the book says, and you'll notice if you get the book that the last section is called the Veda and the teacher. And these are the two things needed. One needs the words of the scriptures, particularly the Upanishads, but one also needs the teacher. And according to this text, if one has those two, and if the two work together well, then one will come to that ultimate realization. But the words of the scripture need to be funneled through the teacher. They come through the teacher. And this text is saying that unless one has that teacher, those words won't be activated. They won't be realized. So according to this text, those are the two things particularly needed.
How many more questions would you like?
Well, I think it's 56, one more maybe.
Great, okay. This is from Anne Scannell. Thank you for your talk on self-discovery. What prompted you to translate this particular work? And what is it about this work that has importance at this particular time?
Well, this text came to our notice. In fact, what we've produced here is only the first third of it. We're still working on the second third at the moment. I think these prakarana granthas, as they're called, these short texts on Advaita Vedanta are very useful. They give an introduction to the actual teaching of Advaita. And I have found them extremely illuminating. As regards to what is needed at the present time, what's really needed at the present time is this realization of one's own self. We all need this in these difficult times. We all face difficult situations of one sort or another. And if we can have recourse to Swatma, one's own self, that pervasive being beyond all those sheaths, those difficulties fade. So it couldn't be more needed at this present time. Thank you. I think that's probably enough.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for this wonderful session, and I'm sure we're getting a virtual applause. And actually, Warwick, before you go, both of you, would you like to give any acknowledgements to anyone who's contributed to
Well, Alina, I would really like to thank you, if I may. And Marula and Tracy in the background there. I should say that this was done only with the help of these three. I wouldn't have had an idea of how to run all this. So thank you so much. You've been most generous in your time and devotion. And thank you so much for making this available. And of course, all the people who have helped with this book, Anik Hardacre and typing it all up. There's been a work of love which has gone on.
Our readers, we had people who read it.
Yes. This has been a whole team effort putting this book out. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for doing all this work on your holidays and making it possible. And we look forward to more in the future too.
Another one coming, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll close the event now. Okay, everyone. So the book is available for purchase, and it comes in two different versions. It comes in a hard copy and a soft copy. So if you would like to purchase it, I am going to share now the details of where you can actually find it. Now, these details, so it's right now available on the bookstore of the Philosophy School's website. So this is the link, and you'll probably find it in the chat at the moment as a link. And you can also call and place an order, and the phone number is provided during normal work days. Now, the digital version is also available on all sorts of different online bookstores. You can search for it or wait for the links that are going to be shared with the email that's going to come out with the recording in the next couple of days. So, so we will be sending out the recording of this session in 2 days' time with all the links and the links to the bookshops too. So thank you so much for participating in today's event with your questions, really, really wonderful questions. So we hope that the ones that did get answered help to enrich what you will be reading and studying. Those that did not get an opportunity to have their question asked, thank you also for sharing it. We usually get the question about how many people have attended. We've had over 600 people attend this from all around the world. So thank you for whatever your time zone is or your circumstances are for joining this session today. Look forward to seeing you in a future event. If you would like to know more about these events that are happening from the School of Practical Philosophy and Economic Science, from the London branch at least, please do sign up on the website to find out more and get notifications, or follow us on the Facebook page. So we will end the event now. I will leave the session running on for another perhaps half an hour to allow for more comments to come through and people to connect, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you very much.